Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, we're going to get into this podcast some more. I may have to make it a little bit shorter today as I had some issues earlier. I'm sorry. But I guess just a little bit of an update and preamble. I want to go ahead and say that I'm getting really, really close to the mids. I'm really close to that. I actually sent pictures to Eric because I wanted to know his opinion because he's very brutal. He's like a very brutal friend. And he said, he was like, you're on the edge of glory. He's like, you're Lady Gaga. He's like, you're right there. He's like, but you're still fat. But he's like, you're very close. And I was like, okay, I think probably I'll be there by March. In mid-size, I was looking into the different definitions of it, and basically it's really hard to tell. I think it's something that we all kind of have to decide for ourselves because it has so much to do with body composition and height and these types of things. So I can tell you what I consider to be mid-size. I'm 6'1", and I think because it's more subjective, what I consider mid-size for myself is having a large pant and an extra large shirt, because everything that I saw, it was kind of like saying that you're in between a large and an extra large. So I'm like, okay, because my pants, I'm getting to a large. My Georgie pants that I wear, my Adidas, they're a 1X, and they are loose. So I'm getting, I'm pretty much a large in pants, and then I'm so close to fitting into a 1X shirt-wise. Like, I wear these, I went to the gym last night, and I was wearing a shirt like this, and it's a 2X, and it's very big on me. So I'm going to be in the mids, and I do have a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about with it. I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I have to kind of work on my relationship with mediocrity within this, because I think this was a huge trigger for me in terms of my E followed by the letter D. Obviously, the emotions I have about it, they're not going to affect how I eat or anything. That's all over. Like, I don't do that, obviously. I'm in remission, I've told you guys, I don't really have it anymore. I don't have it anymore. But I still have some of these triggers, and I feel like as I approach certain things, I do get a little bit like, and I think like when I was a teenager, I didn't want to be mid because it's just so plain or just so like mediocre, But it's like, if you want to kind of level up through the ranks, then you do have to go through this phase. And yeah, so it's a little bit tricky for me. I also agree, one of you guys commented that it's still a loss of identity, in that even a negative identity loss can be good, or like it's good for you, but it still can be distressful a little bit. And I do think that that's happening to me too, because it's not so much in an E followed by the letter D way. It's just more so in like, for any of you guys who know this, I'm an Enneagram 4, which those types of people are obsessed with identity, and I am that way. And so I think it's just a really big change identity-wise, and it's a little stressful for me still. Of course, it's going to happen. I'm going to let it happen, whatever, right? I consider myself an evolved 4, but it just means like I'm an introvert that really cares about identity a lot. And I want to be different or whatever. I don't want to be ordinary. And it's like, it's a trigger for me to be ordinary, which I know sounds really stupid. But I do think it's something I'm going to have to talk about, because I don't think I'm the only one that feels this way. And I do think there are elements of this within fat acceptance and within E followed by the letter D that we're going to need to talk about. And as you guys know, things are always cooking, and we're going to be talking about different aspects in 2025. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue with this podcast. Let's go.
In which structures are built to support me specifically as a white person and a middle class person, right? And I think this is a similar thing. It doesn't mean that you're less accomplished. It doesn't mean that you don't struggle with your body image. It doesn't mean that anything inherent about you has changed. It just means becoming more aware of the ways in which the world receives your body.
Yeah, and works for your body.
Yeah, and works for your body. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I was reading, I'll link in the show notes to all the many fantastic articles you've written on thin privilege, and a statistic that really jumped out at me from one of them, you noted that just under 50% of American adults tried to lose weight between 2013 and 2016, according to the CDC. And you wrote, notably, white people and people with higher incomes were the most likely to be engaged in weight loss efforts, meaning that those of us with particularly pronounced privileges were most likely to be engaged in activities to try to reduce our size.
So I wonder why they care about this. Like, is it... I just don't understand this. This is where I get a little bit like, what? Like, why? And I don't know if it's because they're trying to frame weight loss as like upper class or something, which what is the point of that? Like, are you trying to encourage people who are more poor or people who have less money to be fatter? And why would you do that? It's odd. Do you want to promote poorer health outcomes in people that have less money? Why? It's strange. I think that it's probably a part of this whole, like, it's a resistance or something against the rich, whatever. People insert all the stuff, all the buzz terms, They always try to frame things using, and this is especially relevant with Aubrey, where she tries to frame things using emotional hot button issues. And I need you guys to not take it seriously, because I try to drill it into your guys' heads. Fat acceptance is not political. It's not political. But Aubrey herself, I think because she's a very political person, she tries to merge her disorder with her political activism in a way that I think is very unhealthy. And it really ends up being a huge distraction from the issue. And I think that has been a way that she has guarded her disorder. I cannot stand it, though, because it's extremely manipulative, where she tries to shape things based on whatever political hot button issue is going on at the time, whatever issue people are fiercely arguing about. She did this with COVID in 2020. She's probably going to do it about race in this one, as it's 2021, which you remember the trends in fat acceptance back then. She's then used womanhood in 2023, 2024, right? These conversations about women's bodies, right? She'll use these different things. I've seen her use sexuality. She's compared weight loss to conversion therapy. Like, she tries to tie obesity to these very personal or hot button issues. And it's important for us to not allow her to do that, because that is not the actual point of the conversation. But she always does that, because notice, whenever people bring up weight, they often try to get the issue away from the weight. And it's because people don't actually care a lot of the time. Now, obviously, I care. We care on this channel. There are plenty of us who do care about this issue. But this issue is not that cared about in especially America. It's just not. So people are just like, oh, that's a boring topic. Let's talk about some other hot button issue. And that's kind of how it happens. This happens all the time on Jubilee as well. But I'm always like, no, take it back to the fatness. Take it back. No, no, no. Because what we're trying to do is come to some kind of resolutions here. And again, I'm trying to change cultural conversations about the issue of weight to lead us to more of a solution so that this issue can be put to rest. Because it can be put to rest. This issue has not always existed. It doesn't need to continue to exist. This is a universal issue. I love one of your guys' comments. You said it is the great equalizer. Anybody can struggle with obesity. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your sexuality. It doesn't matter your level of wealth. It doesn't matter what nation you're in. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter what you believe in religiously or lack thereof. It doesn't matter. It is a problem. And it's important to not get caught up in these other conversations that Aubrey, where she tries to mix fatness into these things where it doesn't belong. It just does not belong.
So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, is thin privilege something that already privileged people are sort of actively seeking out?
Absolutely. And I think part of that, to my mind, there's less research on this. This is all just me spitballing. Hey, team. Sorry.
No, there's coughing for, enjoy this.
Yeah. So I would say, to my mind, that is tied to the very explicit history of racism broadly and anti-Blackness in particular that is tied to sort of how we think and talk about fatness and fat people, right? It's also tied to our relationship between class and fatness, right? That when we think about...
So I've always found it interesting about Aubrey that she will tie this issue of weight to anything and anything. And I wish that somebody who interviews her would push back on her and be like, is there anything that weight is not connected to? And I really don't think she could figure something out. I really don't. Because it isn't real. It's a disordered mindset that she has, that it is connected to literally everything. It's not. That's your brain playing tricks on you, Aubrey. It's not real. It just isn't. It really, really isn't.
Who we think of when we think of fat people, overwhelmingly, we are sort of met with these media caricatures of fat people as being poorer than thin people. We are met with caricatures of fat Black folks, particularly as being sort of like the most abrasive of fat people, right? Mm-hmm. And most sort of like weirdly domineering or least intelligent or whatever. It sort of supercharges any of our existing sort of...
So just remember, she's trying to frame it this way to elicit an emotional reaction within you. And she's trying to capitalize on any feelings you have about certain issues so that you'll connect weight to it, so that you'll work to be a fat activist with her, even though it doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense to encourage obesity within poor people or encourage obesity within the Black community. That's not helping those communities whatsoever. That is not a helpful thing at all. So back in this time, they really were connecting obesity to to Blackness. Now it's about connecting obesity to womanhood. I've seen a lot. So it's important to just understand that it's not actually about those issues. She's just using whatever is trending or whatever is a hot button topic at the time to shove in fatness into that. So it's important to not get caught up in that because it isn't actually connected. And that's very important because, again, this is not just a left-wing thing. There are plenty of people on the right that also use the issue of weight to just go into like their whole talking points that are just about their other topics that they talk about. I don't think it's helpful because the issue is not ever actually handled regardless, which is why I'm not a fan of politicizing weight loss, politicizing the issue of weight. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, especially considering I've said many times on the channel there is zero correlation between fatness and belief. Zero. If you could find fat people that believe anything. I'll just put it to you that way. You could find fat people of all races. You could find fat people. Fatness is not a gendered issue. I've talked about that, especially not at bigger sizes. It really isn't. Like, I do think within mid-size, this is where we start to have these differences, which I talked about in my video yesterday. I think because I tend to have this weird blend of gender roles on me because I'm so feminine, but I am a man. I am so unsure of how mid-size will affect me. Honestly, and it's like extremely unpredictable. Like, I don't really have anybody to tell me, but I do think it's more individual, right? So I think we do see more gender differences within mid-size, or we see more differences probably along different races and, you know, that kind of stuff, because it's just is less about being fat and it's more about you, you know, which I think that's a huge trigger for me too. I'm like, it's about me, you know. So it's like, I think those issues do come up a little bit more, or intersections, if you will. I do think that they come up more, but it's not because of anything. It's just that the fatness is not really there. Like, you're technically not fat anymore. So it's more so like you just deal with whatever's, you know. I'm going to really see like what was the fatness that people saw in me and what is the super femi gayishness that people see in me. You know, it's like I'm going to really see, it's going to be separated. And I think that happens to everybody, where it's like, okay, like, this is who I am, or these are these different aspects of my identity. The fatness is now removed from it. Now what? And so I think that's what I'm heading into. And that does make me a little nervous, because especially when you've been so big for so long, you don't know what that looks like, you know? So I think that's an interesting thing to talk about in the mids. But yeah, when we're talking about like obesity, super morbid obesity, all these things, these differences are really less prevalent because it takes up a lot more of your life, and it ends up not being all that different. So I think it's important to not be distracted. That's what I'm trying to say, from the issue. Okay? So just know that forever ago, my Gen Zs, forever ago, the fat acceptance, it was more so on the right. And there were a lot of right-wing excuses as well. So this is not a political issue. Please do not let them politicize it in your mind. It doesn't work. It's just about trends, and it's just about the actual, like, disorder. It will take any form it can to survive in a lot of people. So don't take these political things that she's saying, don't take it that seriously. Okay?
Associations with with a community, right? So I would say, yes, it's something that we seek, and it's something that we seek to, in order to escape the ways that we actually do see fat people being treated,
Right.
frankly, like significantly worse than thin people. So the hard thing is, folks will feel defensive of and disconnected from a sense of their own privilege, while at the same time, on some level, kind of consciously kind of cashing in on it or trying to figure out how to gain more of that privilege,
Yes.
right?
Yes. No, it's so interesting. I was talking
Ugh,
to Deborah
that
Gard
was
about
very word salady. It was very, very word salady. I need to hear it one more time. I'm sorry.
In order to escape the ways that we actually do see fat people being treated,
right.
frankly, like significantly worse than thin people. So the hard thing is, folks will feel defensive of and disconnected from a sense of their own privilege, while at the same time, on some level, kind of consciously kind of cashing in on it or trying to figure out how to gain more of that.
No, so I think what it is that people who, especially back in 2013, I mean, this is a long time ago now. It's kind of ridiculous to be using that. I think the trend back then was like, it's so expensive to lose weight. It's so expensive to lose weight. It's so expensive to lose weight. And the thing is, like, fast food was a lot cheaper back then than it is today. It's not really true anymore. It's kind of really expensive to eat a lot these days. I don't know if you guys have noticed. So I don't think this could be used as much today as it could have been back then. But back then, again, fat acceptance was so strong in America that that was just the prevailing narrative. And a lot of ads would use that and they'd say, this is cheap, this is cheap. Even though if you were to actually cook for yourself, it wasn't actually cheaper. It was just this boom, boom, boom. And it becomes this E followed by the letter D, especially on the B-ed side. It becomes a justification for the disorder. Oh gosh, well, it's so much more expensive to eat healthy, even though obviously it is so much more expensive to binge. And I'm not going to sit here and play games about that. It doesn't matter. Because people will be like, well, I could buy this and it's cheap. It doesn't matter. If you only bought one of it, it would be cheaper. Then you could eat even cheaper. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't work. People just use that as an excuse. So I think it was definitely this big push of that back in 2013 to 2016. But I will say I was still in my toxic ritualistic behaviors very deep. And I still was pursuing it. And I was not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination during those years. Not even close. So, just saying, it's not really relevant, in my opinion.
Privilege,
Yes.
right?
Yes, no, it's so interesting. I was talking to Deborah Gard about this a few years ago, and she said, you know, like a lot of the whole body positivity movement is fat women, like small fat women, trying to get their white privilege back, like trying to sort of like shore up that, like kind of move themselves back up the ladder in a way, if they feel like thin privilege is, there's that loss of privilege. And
See, it just doesn't make sense. I feel like it would have made more sense to say like pretty privilege or something like that, because that might be something that could actually go with something. But again, to try to really, really pin the issue of fatness to something like race, it just does not really work. Because fatness, in terms of social hierarchy or whatever you want to call it, the only thing that it would really affect is your looks. From a purely, like, how does it affect you socially level? It affects your looks. If we're only talking about social, it affects how you look to other people. So that would be more of a pretty privilege thing, and it wouldn't have to do with race. So it's like, again, they're purposefully trying to politicize the issue. They're purposefully trying to make the issue a trigger kind of thing. and to try to argue that gaining weight is somehow transracial is so bizarre. I just cannot even begin to entertain it. Put it to you that way. Okay?
Section of all of this is fascinating, and it is uncomfortable. It is hard to look at in sort of your own, as you said, like kind of look closely at the ways in which you've benefited from these systems. That's super important.
I also just think like the hard thing about sort of bodies and body size is that we do sort of live and operate in a culture that makes absolutely all of us feel like garbage about our bodies, right? So like 100% of people, it's sort of like set up so that all of us feel bad.
So she's trying to be like, we all feel bad, but it's still worse for us. That's an interesting one, Aubrey. Ooh. Gosh.
And part of the challenge is that we conflate.
See, I think it would make more sense, Aubrey, if you were to talk about some of the physical health problems, because then it is worse for us, isn't it? Or it's worse for fat people because there's all these health issues. But she can't say that. So she has to argue socially, we're all treated like crap, but it's somehow worse for us magically. No. The reason why people tend to feel bad for super morbidly obese people is because it is worse. But why is it worse? Because of your health. Because again, regardless of anything, whatever social stigma or social issues that come up with weight, they pale in comparison to health issues that haunt you every moment of every day, even if you're alone, even if you're by yourself, even if you're trying not to think about them. Social issues, they only affect you if you're with other people. But the health issues, they affect you 24/7, 365. That's why it's worse. And again, there are certain structural issues which make it worse too, like not being able to fit on a plane or not being able to fit in certain furniture or having social barriers to like going to people's houses and being concerned over seating. I mean, the stuff, I call it fat noise. It's awful. It's horrible. And I never really have to think about that anymore. And it's amazing, but it's like, I wouldn't consider that a privilege. It's more so I've started to resolve this issue, so I have less problems. That's all. Because it's just something that's bad in and of itself. Whereas there's nothing wrong with being a certain race. There's nothing wrong with being, you know, having an aspect of your identity. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. Whereas with obesity, it's just a bad thing. It's just bad. You know? That's the difference. So it's very hard for her to make these comparisons in this way because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
How we feel about our bodies and how we've been made to feel about our bodies with how much privilege comes with being in that body. And those are two, we got to do a better job of disentangling those things.
Yes.
And which will allow us to actually honor both of them more and dig in on both of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes so much sense. So let's talk about thin privilege with kids. I mean, I see this coming up in a couple different ways. You know, one example that I talked about recently on social media with a friend of mine was shopping for softball.
I think, like I told you guys, I have to kind of make it a little shorter today. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to go ahead, and since they're going to go into kids and they're going to switch topics, then we'll talk about that tomorrow. But thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope that you have a good day, and we will return to this tomorrow. So let's go. See you soon. Bye.